Hello everyone, thanks for coming back to my channel. Today I want to finish my story that I started last week on, how I got into horses and everything, and I ended right when I got Revan back in 2020, COVID. I don't know, I guess you could call him a COVID horse, but we were talking about getting a horse for about a year, and our finances were looking pretty good because, I got that management job just to be able to have a horse in Indiana, and of course that initial plan didn't quite work out, as you know if you watched my previous video on this. But with Revan, he came into the rescue as a 10-month-old, or at least about 10 months old, give or take a few months. And he came in with his mother. He was still suckling off his mother, only because, 10 months old still suckle off their mother if she lets them, but there wasn't really anything else to eat. So he looked fairly healthy and she did not. And I believe, after watching Revan's behavior with mares, because what he does is if he likes the mare, generally, but if he likes the mare, he will allow her to eat the rest of his food. Now, that's not always great because we have food measured out very carefully for each and every horse, generally as horse people, and the person I board with is very good about that. So usually you don't want, the other horses finishing each other's food. So you got to separate them, but generally, he will allow the mare to finish up what he has without fighting. Although he's not like that with geldings or mares he dislikes, which he will be very food defensive and kind of fight back for his food if, he doesn't like them. But generally, and he usually likes younger mares. He doesn't seem to be great with older mares, I think because he had kind of a bad experience getting pinned by an older mare, but anyway, we'll get to that. But I think the stallion because it was the stallion and him in his dam, I think he allowed her to eat what was there because he's the one that starved to death. Because it was not a good situation. The authorities had to come and get them off of the property, and the property owner was charged. So justice was served there. But they both came into the rescue, and I didn't see him per se because I only came there once a week. I did see her, and I did get to kind of get to know her. And she seemed like a very generous mare, but she was in some pretty serious pain. One of her feet were so, she had an abscess that got worse and kept getting worse and it just didn't get any better. It needed attention, but the guy never gave her any attention. So it just got so bad that it ate into her coffin bone, and she only had half a coffin bone left, and it was awful. So given her situation, they weren't able to save her, basically. So what they did was they kept her as long as possible. She was about a month into being due with Revan's full brother, at least we assume full brother. So about a month into being at the rescue, she had him, and they named him Sunday's Promise, and somebody really nice really actually did adopt him. But about 3 months later, she actually just could not get up anymore. She weaned the baby. I know 3 months is very early. With some people it depends on who you talk to, but in my opinion, I think it's very early to wean a baby. But he was weaned by his mother, and I think she knew the end was nigh, so she just could not get up anymore, so they had to euthanize her. So, because she was just beyond help at that point. But they separated Revan from her because her colostrum was coming in. And that is a thing that you want to be aware of, because, I mean, if you are in a controlled situation with a mare, you can let them suckle off of her for as long as she will allow. And generally the mare will wean them. I mean, there are some exceptions where, like, you know, a full-on 2-year-old still trying to suckle from the mother's letting them. But generally, she'll wean them within about a year. Or at least, you know, a year to 18 months or so. But that was not possible in this situation because she was already pregnant and the colostrum was coming in, and they didn't want Revan to, you know, sabotage that for, you know, the next baby. So they separated them. He was very afraid because, you know, he doesn't see very well, and he was feral because he hadn't really been handled. And so there was a local-ish trainer that took him on to gentle him and to halter break him, or halter train him. And she did a very wonderful job. Like, she's got videos and everything, and I'd like to get, I'm eventually wanting to get permission from her so that I can post those videos at a Revan only video. So we'll get to that, but she did a wonderful job because he was so friendly and kind and lovely, lovey afterwards. So he was not afraid of people. He still is not afraid of people. He thinks everybody is his friend. And so that early training it just kind of attests to her ability to gentle a horse. And I think she had done that to a few Mustangs before Revan. So she brought him back because she's like, well, he can lead, basically. And so they didn't immediately geld him because he was Crypt Orchid, and they were trying to wait for that testicle to descend. So, like, maybe. So they're like, okay, we'll wait until he gets adopted and then we'll cut it off and do the best we can from there. So he was about, 11, 12 months, about 12 or 13 months old, and he was still just everywhere. He's just like, he got to rearing and bucking while you're trying to, and it wasn't really a buck, it was more of like a vertical leap in the air, just cuz while you're leading him, like, he's arm's length and he's jumping up and down, and he was just being playful, and he didn't know that people are squishy, and like every, young horse, they're gonna treat people like other horses, and they don't realize that they can really hurt us badly. So he hadn't learned that yet, so, you gotta give him some grace. But I started once a week kind of training him after that. And I know once a week it's kind of like, that's pretty weak, but it was like an hour commute to there, so I'm like, I can only do one day. But yeah, so that started happening. I did that for about 6 weeks, and then I just had this feeling, I'm like, he is the one. I'm going to adopt this horse. I took a video of him. I kind of been like, hey, internet, what do you think? And they're like, well, I mean, he doesn't seem to want to be on his forehand at all. I'm like, okay. And his mother had very good confirmation. She was Foundation Appaloosa. It was very obviously Foundation Appaloosa. Like, she had very good confirmation. Like, she was good breeding stock. So given that, I'm like, well, I don't know what his sire looks like, but kind of given that, I'm like, he's got a 50-50 chance of looking good. So he was like really lanky, and what a yearling looks like, and I'm like, okay, I'll do this. So I agreed to adopt him, and at 14 months old we gelded him, and the testicle kind of descended, so I watched 2 testicles come out, so I know both of them are out. So yep, so we started him up. About a month later, kind of letting him heal a little bit, I found a place that would be okay with bringing a untrained, freshly gelded yearling onto the property. So that helped. And at the same time, allow me to do 24/7 turnout with pasture board. So that also helped, because I wanted him to not have to, like, stand in a stall. I wanted him to be able to move around, eat grass, do whatever he needs to do. So, initially, I'm very comfortable around horses, sometimes too comfortable around horses. And I remember I kind of snuck up on him, and I didn't realize I was sneaking up on him until he double barreled me in the shoulder, in the arm, and I'm like, I got a big bruise from that. I'm like, okay, I'll be careful this time. And what I mean by double barrel is he literally like popped his hind end up, swung both of his legs out, and got me. I'm like, yeah, I think I need to be careful with this, because he was kind of food defensive, anyway. I think because he was starved. Thankfully, that's been mostly taken care of when it comes to people. Thank you, person I board with. I don't want to say the name unless I have permission, so you know who you are. Thank you very much. Because that's a daily thing, and coming 2 to 3 times a week, I can't really do that, and me not really being the one to feed him, it's hard to do. So yeah, they helped me out with that quite a bit. So thank you. But anyway, first pasture we put him out into had a mare, which I didn't realize she would be so nasty, and a mini. And they're like, the mini's so sweet, he's so sweet with all the horses. And I'm like, okay. So I put him out, and every time I got him, he had like a wound, and he was like cowering in the shelter every single time, even though it was like in the middle of summer. And I'm like, there's something going on here. So when I observed the herd behavior after I put him out, he would run over there and she would chase him. And a few days later, I found out that he had run the fence twice. And I'm like, so I talked to the leasee of the place, because she didn't really own the place, but I said, I think he's getting cornered and he's running the fence that way. Like, I don't think he's just running the fence for the sake of running the fence. And she's like, yeah, okay. And then I like took a video of this mini like pinning him up against the fence, and the mini was like trying to do body language stuff like, get out, move. And Revan was just frozen. He's like, I don't know what to do. And then he'd like run into the fence. Like, it was a different part of the fence that he ran that wasn't as breakable than the one he ran. So I'm like, okay, the mini, like the mare is chasing him around, the mini is pinning him, and that's why he's running the fence. So she's like, all right, let's move him. So we're like, okay, where do we move him? He's a yearling. We don't want to put him out in the big herd, because there's a bunch of adult horses there that will likely do the same thing. So she had this mare that was injured. It was kind of a rescue situation, and pregnant. And she actually foaled when Revan was in his quarantine period, when they were just keeping him in a stall to make sure that he was still eating, pooping, peeing, whatever. So like, this was before we had put him out with the other mare and he ran the fence. So it was in between. So they put him in a stall, and he was next to her while she was foaling, so he actually got to see the foaling. And he seemed okay with that mare. So when she was able to be put out in the pasture with, another horse, they put him out in the pasture with her. So thinking, well, she can't really run because she's lame. And the baby is just going to be right next to her. So we think he's going to be okay, because the worry would be he was going to beat up on the baby, or start suckling off the mother, because he was only 4 months past, or 4 or 5 months past suckling off his own mother. And I think he sniffed her, but he didn't really do anything. But when we put both of them out, he just seemed to be like this best big brother to this little filly. And it was just so cute. Like, the mom was like, get away from me. She would push him away. But it was like a 20-foot circle around her that it was like off limits. The baby, the filly would stay right close to her. And so Revan would be like always 20 feet away from this mare and baby. And it just kind of stayed like that. It was like harmony, peace, and that mare taught him boundaries, which is nice. Boundaries in a way that, you know, he wasn't going to get run into a fence. He had the space to run away and kind of come back and see how things were. And as the filly got older, they played, and he seemed to be very gentle with the filly. And I think to most, you know, foals, I think he would be a good big brother, because he didn't seem to play rough with the young ones at all. So anyway, as she got older, the mare was taken away for the weaning, because, you know, they didn't do natural weaning, they did forced weaning. Neither here nor there, but they started getting, you know, gaining more boarders that had younger horses. So this was like a whole year that, you know, he was kind of like alone with this filly. And then, so he became 2 years old. And then they added another 2-year-old, and then another 2-year-old. So there was like a little band of 3 2-year-old geldings. And then they took the filly away and kind of put her in a different pasture. Because they were like, yeah, those geldings are going to spar, and she's not going to... We don't want her in the middle of that. And they did spar. So he got to know how to spar and how to kind of hold his own in a herd with that herd of young, you know, geldings. And of course there was like peace in the kingdom for a while. It was about another year and a few months. Or no, year and 2 months that there was peace in the kingdom. And at his 3-year-old year, there was another boarder, like the owner started taking on more and more boarders. There was another boarder that had this horse that they put out in the larger herd. And it was a very dominant adult Frisian. So that Frisian decided to beat up on a few horses in that herd. And so, since a few horses in that herd became injured because of this horse, the owner decided to put him with the 3-year-old geldings. The young 3-year-old geldings. While I was on vacation. And I came back to a horse that had a softball size, like, contusion on his hip. Thankfully, it was in soft tissue, because at this point, 3-year-old, his hips are fusing from 4 pieces into 2 pieces. And I'm like, oh my god, I'm going to have a horse that is lame. Like, he's just going to be lame. And, like, there was the skin was all scraped up, and his fur was missing in that area. And I'm like, looking at the other horse's hooves, I'm like, which hooves could have scraped this? Because he was out with those 2 other geldings for over a year without any problems. I mean, he cut some bruises here and there, but not like this. And then I saw this Frisian's feet. He was kind of torn up. The feet were kind of torn up. They needed a trim. They were not smooth. And the pattern seemed to be consistent with his feet. So I'm like, this Frisian did this. So I'm like, okay, you know, maybe that was just the first initial thing. I'm going to be pretty, and it's in soft tissue, so I'm fairly certain I could heal it. So I'm like, this is just horses being horses. I put them out 24/7. This is what happens sometimes. So I'm trying to heal him. He is not lame, by the way. He was not lame. I think he was just a little sore. Thankfully, because, you know, it didn't seem like his bones were broken at all. And it's odd, because this same exact injury happened on a friend's horse that he was put out with prior to this, on the same side in the same place. I'm like, oh, so he's got a history of attacking the hip. So put him back out, and then I was observing the herd behavior, and this horse was chasing my horse away from the water. And it wasn't like the Frisian was close and they just kind of chased him away. Revan looked like he was trying to sneak into the water area to drink. Like, he was like looking around like, okay, I think the coast is clear, I'll try to get some water. And the Frisian, which was at the exact opposite side, like, this was a several acre pasture, huge, opposite side of the pasture, this Frisian comes barreling towards Revan, past horses, like, get out of my way, and then just goes after Revan. Like, I had to break it up before Revan became even more injured. Like, this was rough. And I'm like, this horse wants Revan dead, basically. And he is not going to let up. And I'm like, I've already gone through having to put down a horse from severe colic because she was being chased away from the water. I'm not having this. Nope. So, like, even without permission, I just told him, I'm like, I am taking him out of this I'm taking Revan out of this pasture and putting him in a different one because I can't do this. She's like, okay. And I'm like, yeah. So I put him in a pasture with a few other horses with this one border where she had multiple horses in that pasture. And I'm like, can I just put him out here? He's fine with mares, because I think all of them were mares. And she's like, yeah, that's fine. He's getting beat up on him. And she saw the bruising, the injury. And it was actually ended up being good that I put him out in that pasture with her horses, because there was an issue with the fence, and one of her horses, had some shoes on, and she got her foot caught in the wire. And the wire was like wedged underneath the heel in between the shoe and the hoof. And she was just like, and I was getting Revan at that time, routine. And I'm like, she's caught in it. I'm like, if I ignore this, she is going to colic. She's going to die. I'm like, this is not okay. So she was panicked. So I slowly approached her. She let me get near her. And, the fence, this wasn't an area where the fence was on. It was kind of like, we put up the fence, we didn't attach it, but they all know that it's electrified, so they shouldn't play with it. Thankfully. Or else she would have been getting electrocuted. Or zapped continuously, and she would have, like, pulled that shoe off with some hoof. But anyway, I managed to get close enough and calm her down enough that I could handle her hoof. I got her undone and let her go, and then I kind of walked her around to make sure she was okay, and then I texted the owner, and the owner's like, oh, thanks so much. So that ended up being that, because she was kind of on her way out anyway, and this property was like kind of questionably safe. It wasn't like the best, but I'm like, I don't have anywhere else to go. Like, where am I gonna go? So out on that pasture, Revan was able to heal and to kind of recover. He was actually sore from that particular injury for the next, I want to say 8 months. So that one took 8 months to get over and heal. And I'm like, I don't think I would be as forgiving if this happened again. And it's different if the horse is out with other horses, they're playing, it's an accident. But this was something that was actually malicious, and I am not okay with this. But sometimes you just don't really know until they do it. But, like, you got to observe the herd behavior, and, like, is this particular horse going to do that? And it's really hard to tell, and I don't want to be playing the blame game. But I'm like, this horse was put out for weeks with this behavior and not taken away. I'm like, this is not okay. So that one took 8 months to heal. In the meantime, by fall, because this was summer, by fall, that property had been sold to another owner, so that was like, gotta get out, get an eviction notice, basically. So I'm like, I'm gonna have to find someplace else. And there's this gal that taught lessons there, and she was like, hey, I found this other place, it's completely new. We can kind of do a thing there, because this was when I first started kind of considering getting like a paid course put together, like, and I'm like, I don't know, I'm still working at FedEx, I don't really need the money, but I kind of want to, because I had like, I don't know, kind of a student. I was starting to do this summer series clinic clinical style group lesson thing. So I did that for a little while, like this 2002. And I'm like, I figured out that I'm like, I don't like group style lessons. Maybe 2 people, but not 6. Nah. And so yeah, and it started, I don't know, what is this, 2024? So yeah, so I started doing like those very lightly. I didn't do those seriously until the next summer, but anyway, I moved to this new place, and this person seemed okay. My husband's like, this woman's crazy, and I'm like, oh, I should think she seems okay. You know, most horse people are crazy. The last person Mick didn't really like, but I'm like, she was decent. And so she was like, she had these 4 paddocks, this pasture, and a ton of other land that she wanted to make into a big arenas, because she wanted to be like a show place for counter jumper. So I'm like, whatever. She had an indoor. I'm like, okay, this was perfect. An indoor, I can do, you know, record as long as I want, whenever I want. And it seemed okay. It seemed fine. And it was a little bit more expensive, but it seemed like a deal considering what we were getting. So I'm like, okay, we got pasture board. She had these 4 really nice paddocks, and she's like, I'm not going to be pasture boarding a lot, but all the pasture boarders are going to be in these paddocks, and then they're going to be transferred out with the horses in the stalls. And, you know, there's going to be, the pasture will rest and all that. Because I wanted to know what pasture management was like. I did ask all these questions. I'm like, you know, how many horses are you having on the property based off of how much room is there? And she's like, only this many in these stalls, and then the 4 pasture boarders, and that's it. And I'm like, perfect. Because she had a dry lot for her horses and all of that, and I'm like, okay, this seems reasonable. And I kind of like the idea of having my own little paddock that I agreed to kind of clean out a little bit, because I mean, a paddock you don't really have to clean out every single day like you do a stall, because, you know, it's the ground. It soaks up the moisture that's created, and then just the poop piles together. So I started doing that, and she seemed pretty good. And she was feeding him, because we came to an agreement where she would feed him his grain, because I couldn't always make it every day. And it seemed okay for a while, until December hit, and she started taking on more and more boarders and managing the pasture less and less. So this entire property turned into a mud pit. Like, she didn't have any drainage like she said she did, and like, it was awful. Like, the horses were just standing on like little pieces of ground that were still dry. So the stall boarders, and it was like, it was a mud pit, but yet she was charging like $750 for stall board, just because she had an indoor, and like an indoor that wasn't really well managed, and then an outdoor that only had base in it. And I'm like, really? And I mean, I was paying $400 in pasture board, so I'm like, I expected something that was like a little bit more, you know, more. So what she did was she started putting the pasture boarders, which was just me and one other horse, unfortunately, out in the main pasture and leaving them out there. And then those paddocks turned into smaller turnout paddocks for other boarders that, you know, had an older horse or a younger horse. And so I'm like, okay, this isn't really the agreement, so like, one check off of the thing. So I'm like, okay, it seems somewhat reasonable still. Then she started not feeding him, not telling me that. So he started losing weight, and I'm like, why am I losing weight? Why is he losing weight? And then I didn't really notice the problem until his feed started lasting quite a bit longer than it should have. So I'm like, okay, this is a big problem. And since he was being left out in the pasture, so I talked to her about, you know, not feeding him. And she's like, well, it's just so, inconvenient because it's so muddy out there. And I'm like, it doesn't matter. You're managing this. I'm paying you to keep my horse alive. And so that was an issue. So she started feeding him inside. So she'd bring him in, the other boarder, the pasture boarder in, and feed all the horses inside and then try to turn him back out without anybody else out there. She's like, you're pasture boarding. And I'm like, yeah, but generally there's other boarders. And she also had this thing where geldings and mares had to be separated. So he was constantly sparring with the other geldings, and the other pasture boarders were all mares, which she put out in this other pasture that was like 1 acre, and she had 12 horses on 1 acre. Not a surprise, it turned into a big mud pit as well. So I'm like, 12 horses on this one thing, and I'm like, this is not good pasture management. This is not what I've been promised at all. Like, I am starting to go crazy. And then I found that her horses, when she put them in, it's like a gauntlet. You had to go down it. They're all wanting to bite each other, and this, like, a good indication of how a owner is you see their horse. If their horse is nice and calm and collected and be like, yeah, I love the world, and then generally the person treats them well. If the horse is constantly under stress and so stressed that it is lashing out at people, then that person is causing these horses immense amounts of stress. So that was a thing. And then the indoor arena finally got its sand in there, and then that sand was not the sand that was promised. And it sounds kind of pretentious of me to be like, it's the wrong sand. But no, the wrong sand can injure a horse. And between the mud and the indoor arena sand, his SI was injured. Like, the soft tissue. And I'm like, I am going crazy at this point. I'm like, I am going nuts. I'm like, what is going on? Like, I need to find another place. So I started trying to look on the internet for another place quietly because this person was crazy. And then came the round bales. So feeding the horses round bales in the middle of winter. Usually fine, right? Unless you put them in the middle of mud. And they sank. And they became bad. And then she was like, well, in order to keep them on top of the mud and dry, I'm going to keep the wrapping on. And the wrapping was just like around the outside, and then the sides could be accessed. And I'm like, they're going to eat the plastic. She's like, no, they won't. I'm like, yeah, they will. Her own horses started eating the plastic. And I'm like, this is not good. Like, I had to cut the plastic off my own horse's thing, and I got in trouble for that. I'm like, it was half submerged in water. Like, one of these days in the Revan only video, I will post the pictures that I have. It's awful. And then she was like, so then Revan started going through the fence because he didn't want to be standing in water anymore and mud. And he wanted to find other things to eat naturally. So he started going through the fence. She's like, he's a menace. He's going through the fence. I keep, having to put hours and hours into this fence. And I'm like, well, you're going to put up a permanent fence that you said you would? And she's like, no, I don't want to do that unless all of the fences match. So it's going to be years before that happens. I'm like, oh, okay. So the horse is going to continue to get out. And then the last straw was when one of the other boarders found Revan standing in the middle of the road because it was dry in the middle of the road. I'm like, he is going to die. This is not a safe place for him. And one of the other times was she brought him in because it was like -30 out. And she purposely put him, the owner, put him in the stall that had an inch worth of urine. Not cleaned out, not anything. She didn't call me and say, hey, I got this stall, it hasn't been cleaned out, can you come over here? I would like to put Revan in it. No. Didn't say anything, just put him in there. And then I find him a day later, cowering up against the side of the stall, and I'm like walking in this urine. I'm like, this is awful. I'm like, I'm so sorry, Revan. I'm like, I am going to lose my mind. The other last straw was when I heard that this owner cornered a boarder, not even her own horses, like torture your own horses, but a boarder, in the stall and beat her until she was cowering and shivering in fear because she looked at her in a disrespectful way. And I'm like, my horse is eventually going to get beaten with by this woman as well. I'm like, I am losing my mind. I'm like, why did I even come here? I'm like, I don't even know what's going on. Why am I paying for this? And so this is awful. So I find a person, and I'm like, I don't want to be a complainer, so I didn't tell her about any of this stuff. I'm like, I gotta get out. And this is the person I'm boarding with, so I'm like, oh, this is lovely. I love this. So I'm like, okay, when can I come over? She's like, at the end of the month. I'm like, perfect. Which ended up being like a week away from, you know, when I was boarding, you know, the last week of boarding, and I organized transport. I didn't tell this woman. Organized transport, opened up the back of the thing. It was a windy day. It had to be like 35-mile-an-hour winds. It was nuts. And I needed, we got everything out. My husband talked to this woman because I would have just lost my mind on her. And my husband's like, okay, we're leaving. She's like, what do you mean? We're like, we're taking Revan and we're leaving. She's like, when? I'm like, right now. Because I didn't want to tell her. Because I was afraid that she would lash out at Revan and beat him and give him bad experiences with people, and then I would be undoing that for the next 10 years. So no, we're not doing this. So I didn't tell her until the minute we left, and I was leading Revan, and I'm like, we have done trailer loading literally 4 times in his lifetime. Like, he had better trailer load right now. So we came out, we saw the trailer, Revan's like neighing, and he's like, all right, we're going. So I jump into the trailer, he jumps into the trailer, no problems. I put him on, tie him up, I'm like, and the trailer driver's just like, I'm just gonna go. And she's like, yes. We pack up the rest of the stuff in the car. We go down, catch up to the trailer, and then go to the current place where I'm boarding, which has been a lovely 2 years. So, yeah, that was awful. And this is why you want to vet the places you go to and try to look at the property in the worst time of year to see how bad it's going to be. Which I didn't do that last place. I did do to this place because it was like March in the middle of muddy season, and I'm trying to get out of the mud that was literally like 1.5 feet deep, consuming cars. Like, the tractor had to pull cars out of this stuff. And the person that owned the new place was like, oh, this is so bad, this mud is so bad, I can't do this. And I'm like, if I can go out there in my sneakers and only be a little bit muddy, it's not that bad. It is like night and day. I'm like, it's really not that bad. It's not. And so this person that I'm boarding with is so meticulous about the hay and the grain, and she lets me know about things, and she sends me cute videos sometimes, and I'm like, I love this, this is so good. I know my horse is always going to be alive, unless he does something stupid. And of course he's had his injuries, and that's always been because of his own stupidity, but I think I'm just going to stay here until I either get my own place or she kicks me out, because this is amazing. This place is amazing. So it doesn't have like as many bells and whistles like a knitter or anything, but I don't care. He's being taken care of, and I don't have to worry about him or his well-being. That is the most important thing to me. And that's why I'm still there, because I care about my horse's well-being. And he can be out pasture 24/7, and he can just romp around whenever he wants, so it's good. It's good. Now the next step is to try to keep fly mask and fly boots on him, which he maliciously rips off. So anyway, so I've been there for the last 1.5 years, and it took about 18 months to completely heal his SI injury, which is common for a soft tissue injury like that. And he still gets his psoas muscles tight. His psoas muscles still get pretty tight, but I don't know if that's just because of our training regimen or if that's his SI he's trying to stabilize. But his SI is actually very flexible. Like, I can raise he could twist his pelvis pretty well. So it doesn't seem to hurt him. It's just sometimes he has sore muscles and we just rub it out. So I think that's just a normal horse thing at this point. So he is not injured. I mean, there was an injury this past spring, but it was like one of those, you kind of leave it be. I did use red light therapy, and red light therapy is absolutely amazing and I love it. But you do have to use it every day. So I would recommend, if you're going to do a red light thing, buy your own red light therapy pad. It's worth it. But yeah, I've been very happy where I'm at with him, and he is learning a lot, and there's like kumbaya there, which I'm very happy about. So yeah, that's Revan's story. The three places we have boarded, injuries, and where we're at right now. So that's his story. So first 4.5 years of owning him, because he was a yearling when I got him. But that's about it. I wanted to tell you I am figuring out my little, in the middle of a video jingle, which is like, it's gonna be somewhat reminiscent to like, hey, this video is brought to you by X patron or my students, because a lot of these videos are brought to you and paid for by the students that I teach here in Central Indiana, because they are the income. And thank you, everybody, which I appreciate. So like, this video is brought to you by all my Central Indiana students. Thank you. You guys are amazing. I love you. But yeah, something like that. And just kind of like I do teach here live, and I do teach on the internet, so live and online. But I'm putting that together. I am selling some things on eBay. I might put my eBay kind of store thing. It's like, I'm gonna be putting up some horsey items within the next couple of weeks on there. It's just horsey items I don't need anymore. I don't want anymore. So I might put that up for you if you're interested, but like otherwise, I'm like, it's eBay. It's nothing interesting. So I want to thank you guys for watching. I want you to have a wonderful day, and always be kind and do your best. Thank you.